Malia Carter slumped onto a metal bench in a sweltering Birmingham holding cell, her orange jumpsuit sticking to her skin as sweat beaded down her neck. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and rust, the walls stained with peeling paint. That flaked onto the concrete floor like dead skin. Her wrist still ached from the courtroom shackles, but her mind raced, replaying the 3 years she'd spent burrowing into Judge Vernon Holt's corrupt empire. She'd posed as a courier, hauling packages across town, her hands slipping tiny cameras into the crevices of his oak-panelled office, while he barked orders at trembling clerks. She'd lingered as a delivery driver, dropping off catered lunches laced with microphones she'd tucked into foam containers, catching his hissed deals with prison execs over steak sandwiches. She'd even scrubbed floors as a janitor, her mop swiping close enough to his desk to plant fake bribe receipts among his bourbon-stained papers, each one a thread in the web she'd woven to trap him. 3 years of shadows, of holding her breath, of swallowing his sneers as he sentenced black folks to decades for crimes thinner than air. Today was supposed to be the payoff. Get framed, take the fall, let the feds swoop in with warrants blazing. Her earpiece, a sleek black bead nestled beneath her braids, had recorded his slurs from chambers that morning, his voice dripping venom as he'd called her street filth not worth the ink on her file. That clip was her ace, her ticket out. She shifted on the bench, the metal creaking under her weight, and waited for the rumble of Travis Reed's team to break the silence. But the hours dragged on, the cell growing hotter as the Alabama sun climbed higher outside. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the bars, and Malia's fingers traced the edge of her jumpsuit, her nails digging into the fabric to keep her steady. She'd counted on Travis, her handler, a 40-year-old ex-soldier, with a voice like gravel and a loyalty forged in fire. He'd promised extraction by sundown, his words sharp over their last encrypted call. "You take the hit, we'll pull you out. Holt's done." She trusted him, had to trust him. But the silence gnawed at her like a splinter under skin. Footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy and deliberate, and a guard appeared, his gut spilling over his belt, his pale face twisted into a sneer. "Dinner, princess," he spat, tossing a tray of grey mush onto the floor, the slop splattering across her sneakers. "Better eat up, you black trash, ain't no one coming for you." The slur landed like a slap, but Malia kept her face blank, her training locking her jaw tight. She'd heard worse, felt worse, but the casual hate still burned, a reminder of why she'd joined the FBI, why she'd taken this gig. She bent down, scooping the tray up, her eyes never leaving his. "You'll regret that," she said, her voice low, a promise coiled in every syllable. He laughed, a wet guttural sound, and lumbered off, his boots clomping against the tiles. Across town, Judge Vernon Holt leaned back in his leather chair, the city sprawling beneath his chamber's wide windows, overlooking Birmingham's skyline. At 62, with silver hair slicked tight and a jaw carved from years of barking orders, he carried himself like a man who'd never tasted defeat. His wire-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose as he sipped bourbon from a crystal glass, the amber liquid sweating in the humid air. The room smelled of polish and power, the walls lined with framed photos of him shaking hands with grinning politicians, each smile a brick in his empire. He'd built his career on crushing people like Malia Carter, stacking sentences to keep. Alabama's private prisons fat with bodies, and his accounts fatter with kickbacks. 30 years for a drug charge she didn't commit? He'd done worse for less, and he'd do it again. But now his phone buzzed, a sharp trill cutting through the quiet, and he snatched it up, his thick fingers swiping the screen. A text from Leonard Baxter, his enforcer. "Clips online, your voice trouble." Holt's stomach twisted as he opened X, the app loading a grainy audio file already retweeted 1,000 times. His own words blared through the speaker. "Street filth like her don't deserve a trial, just a cage." The courtroom gavel's echo followed, tying it to Malia's sentencing. His bourbon stopped halfway to his lips, his pulse quickening. As comments flooded in, "Racist pig, justice for Malia, Holt must fall." He slammed the phone down, the glass rattling against the desk, and stood, his chair scraping the hardwood floor. "Damn her," he muttered, his voice a low growl as he paced to the window. The city glittered below, but he saw cracks forming, shadows of unrest stirring in the streets. That clip wasn't random. Someone had planted it, someone close. Malia Carter hadn't flinched when he dropped the hammer, her eyes steady, her lips twitching with something he couldn't place. Defiance? Knowledge? He buzzed his intercom, the static crackling as he barked, "Len, get in here!" Leonard. Baxter stepped in moments later, all 6 feet 4 inches of him filling the doorway, his buzzed blonde hair catching the fluorescent light. An ex-cop turned muscle. Len had dodged a brutality rap thanks to Holt's pull, and his meaty hands flexed like they itched to break something. "Boss?" he said, his voice a rumble. Holt tossed him Malia's thin case file, the one he'd padded with lies about a drug bust in a downtown alley. "Dig into this Carter woman. She's too calm, too clean. Find me something, anything." Len nodded, his pale blue eyes narrowing as he tucked the file under his arm. "You think she's got juice?" Holt snorted, sipping his bourbon again, the burn steadying him. "Maybe, or maybe she's just dumb. Either way, I want her buried." Back in the cell, Malia sat cross-legged on the bench, her dark eyes scanning the shadows as her mind churned. The earpiece recording was live, the world hearing Holt's hate in real time. She pictured Travis storming the courthouse now, warrants in hand, his team hauling Holt out in cuffs while Birmingham's streets erupted in cheers. She'd endured his gavel, taken his frame up, and now it was her turn to swing. The guard's taunt lingered, but she shook it off, her lips twitching with the ghost of a smile. This was it, her win, the moment she'd clawed for. Then a faint buzz vibrated in her pocket, a burner phone Travis had slipped her during booking, its screen glowing with a single message. "Warrant stalled. Holt's got friends, hold tight." Her stomach dropped, the smile fading as her fingers tightened around the device. Stalled? Travis Reed didn't stall. He'd busted her out of tighter spots, from a Chicago drug den to a Miami smuggling ring, his wiry frame always first through the door. 6 years together, and he'd never let her down. Until now. She stood pacing the 5x7 space, her sneakers squeaking on the damp floor, the heat pressing harder against her chest. Something was off, a prickle crawling up her spine, like static before lightning. Outside, Holt leaned over his desk, his bourbon glass empty as he scrolled X again, the clip's retweets climbing to 10,000. Protests were forming, hashtags like Free Malia and Holt Hates trending as grainy videos of her sentencing flickered across screens. He'd underestimated her, this nobody who dared meet his gaze without blinking. Len returned, his heavy steps thudding as he dropped a single page on the desk. Nothing deep yet, but her ID's too perfect. Smells like a Fed cover. Holt's eyes narrowed, his mind racing back to whispers he'd ignored. Feds sniffing around Birmingham's courts, too careful to catch. He'd dismissed them, his tracks buried under burned files and loyal dogs like Len. But now... "She's playing me," he muttered, slamming his fist down, the desk shuddering. "Get to the jail, plant something, drugs, a weapon, anything. Double her time, now." Len grinned, a wolfish flash of teeth, and headed out, his boots echoing down the hall. Malia heard boots again, louder this time, and straightened, expecting Travis's coded knock, a 3-tap rhythm they'd used since her first gig. Instead, the door swung open, and Len Baxter loomed in the frame, a plastic baggie dangling from his fingers, white powder glinting inside. "Found this in your bunk," he lied, his voice dripping with mock surprise, as the sadistic guard smirked behind him. "Looks like 60 years now, sweetheart." Malia's blood turned cold, her pulse hammering as Len tossed the baggie onto the bench, the guard scribbling a report with glee. She'd leaked the clip, thought she'd won, but Holt had struck back, his reach slithering through bars to choke her tighter. The cell walls closed in, the heat suffocating, and she clenched her fists, nails biting her palms. 60 years. This wasn't just a frame-up anymore, it was a burial, and Holt was shoveling the dirt. Malia Carter jolted awake as the cell door clanged open, her muscles stiff from the hard bench, her jumpsuit damp with sweat that clung like a second skin. The Birmingham holding cell's heat had baked her through the night, but now guards barked. Orders, their voices sharp as they yanked her to her feet. "Move it, trash," one snarled, his breath sour with coffee, as he shoved her toward a rusted van idling outside. She stumbled, her wrists cuffed tight, the metal biting into her skin as they hauled her to Jefferson County Jail, a squat grey fortress 30 miles north, where Vernon Holt's shadow loomed larger than the razor wire curling atop its walls. The transfer was quick, the van's tires humming over cracked asphalt, but Malia's mind churned, piecing together the last 12 hours, her earpiece leak exposing Holt's hate, Len Baxter's planted drugs doubling her sentence to 60 years. Travis Reed's stalled warrants leaving her caged. She'd thought the online storm would free her, but Holt's reach had snapped back, a steel trap tightening around her throat. The van lurched to a stop, and guards dragged her through intake, their hands rough as they strip-searched her. There, slurs a low hum beneath the clatter of keys. "Another black rat for the grinder," one muttered, tossing her a fresh jumpsuit stained with someone else's blood. She pulled it on, the fabric coarse against her skin, and they shoved her into the general population, the cell block a roaring pit of shouts and clanging steel. Malia kept her head low, her dark eyes scanning the yard as she stepped into the open air, the sun glaring off the concrete like a spotlight. Inmates sprawled on benches or paced in tight knots, their stares prickling her skin as she moved toward the fence. She'd been here before, undercover, slipping through shadows to plant bugs in the warden's office. But now she was prey, her orange silhouette a target in Holt's domain. Whispers slithered through the crowd, carried by guards who lingered. Too long near certain cells. "She's a snitch," one hissed, loud enough to turn heads, his baton tapping his palm like a metronome of menace. Malia's pulse quickened, her FBI training kicking in as she clocked 3 inmates peeling off from a dice game, their strides purposeful, their hands tucked into waistbands. The leader, a wiry woman with a shaved head and a scar jagged across, her cheek stepped close, her breath hot with tobacco. "Heard you talk to cops, rat," she spat, her voice a blade slicing the air. Before Malia could answer, a shiv flashed, cold steel glinting as it arced toward her ribs. She twisted, the blade grazing her arm, blood blooming through the sleeve as she slammed her elbow into Scar's jaw, the crack of bone echoing across the yard. The other 2 lunged, fists flying, but Malia ducked, her foot sweeping one's legs, sending her sprawling into the dust. The third landed a punch to her gut, air exploding from her lungs, but she spun, grabbing his wrist and twisting until he yelped, the shiv clattering free. Guards shouted, boots pounding, but they moved slow, their batons raised like afterthoughts. Malia stood panting, blood dripping onto the concrete, her arm a throbbing mess. But she'd held her own, kept her cover intact. Across town, Travis. Reed hunched over a laptop in a dingy motel room, the blinds drawn tight against Birmingham's midday glare. At 40, with a wiry frame honed by years in the field, his scarred hands flew over the keys, uploading a new file to X, a grainy photo of Holt shaking hands with a prison CEO, a timestamp tying it to a bribe Malia had planted 2 years back. The post exploded, retweets climbing to 5,000 in minutes as hashtags flared. Holt corrupt, free Malia now. Travis cracked his knuckles, his jaw tight as he dialed a contact at the FBI field office. "Push the warrants," Ikaisia growled, his voice rough from sleepless nights. "She's bleeding in there." Outside, protests swelled, 1,000 voices chanting her name near the jail's gates, signs bobbing in the crowd. "Justice for Malia. Holt hates black." "Lives?" Travis grinned, a flicker of hope warming his chest. Malia's leak had lit the fuse. This would blow it wide open. She'd taken the hit, and now he'd pull her out. He pictured her in that cell, her sharp mind ticking, her resolve unbent. She'd endured worse, like that sting in Memphis where she dodged a cartel blade with a smirk. This was her win, he told himself, the tide turning at last. Back at the jail, Malia sank onto a cot in the infirmary, the air sharp with antiseptic as she gripped a stolen needle and thread from a supply cart. Her arm bled steadily, a jagged gash from the shiv staining the mattress red, but she stitched, it herself, her hand steady despite the sting. Each pull of the thread was a promise. Holt would fall, the protest would force his hand, Travis would break through. She'd seen the crowd through a barred window, their roar shaking the walls, and her lips twitched with a ghost of triumph. 3 years of planting evidence, of swallowing his hate, and now the world saw him for the snake he was. She tied off. The stitch. Her breath slowing as she leaned against the wall, the cold steel grounding her. This was it, the crack in his armor, the moment she'd clawed for. But then a TV flickered on in the corner. A local news anchor's voice cutting through the quiet. Malia Carter, a violent drug dealer, attacked inmates today, sources say. The screen flashed her mugshot, her face twisted into a scowl, followed by doctored footage of the yard fight, edited to paint her as the aggressor. Judge Vernon Holt calls her a tragic example of Birmingham's crime wave, the anchor droned, and Malia's stomach knotted, her stitches pulling tight as her fists clenched. Holt had paid them off, turned her shield into a sword against her. In his chambers, Holt sipped coffee, a smug grin tugging at his lips as he watched the broadcast on a polished flat screen. The room was a fortress of power, mahogany shelves groaning with law books he'd never read, the city sprawling below like a kingdom he'd tamed. Leonard Baxter stood by the window, his hulking frame casting a shadow across the floor, his knuckles cracking as he flexed his meaty hands. "Told you she'd bleed," Len said, his voice a low rumble. Holt nodded, setting his mug down with a clink. "She thought she'd play me. Now the city hates her." He'd called in favors, slipped cash to Channel 9's producer, fed them lies to flip the narrative. The protests still buzzed outside, but this smear would choke them, turn Malia into a villain no one would save. He leaned back, savoring the bitter brew on his tongue, certain she'd crumble under the weight. But then Len's phone buzzed, a text glowing on the screen. Carter's alias, glitch in birth cert, fed vibes. Holt's grin faded, his coffee stopping halfway to his lips as his mind raced. A glitch. He'd seen that before, sloppy covers from feds too rushed to bury their tracks. "She's one of them," he muttered, his voice a hiss as he slammed the mug down, splashing brown across his desk. "Triple her bail, 1 million cash, no calls, no visitors, lock her down tight." Malia heard boots again, heavier this time, and straightened on the cot as Len stormed in, his buzzed head gleaming under the infirmary's harsh lights. "Bail's set," he sneered, tossing a clipboard at her feet. 1 million. "Good luck. Princess." She picked it up, her eyes scanning the page, Holt's signature scrawled at the bottom like a death warrant. Her stomach dropped, the stitches in her arm throbbing as her pulse hammered. 1 million. That was impossible, a number meant to bury her here forever. The protests, her leak, her fight in the yard, all for nothing. Holt wasn't just framing her, he was crushing her, his suspicion sharpening into a blade. She clenched, her fists, blood seeping through her bandage as Len grinned, his pale blue eyes glinting with malice. "Boss wants you questioned. Deep." She'd thought the streets would save her, but Holt had turned them against her, his counterstrike slamming shut every door. The cell block buzzed with tension, eyes following her every move, and she sank back, her mind spinning. This wasn't just a trap anymore. It was a war, and Holt was drawing first blood. What do you think of Holt's ruthless smear campaign? Comment 1 if you believe he's crossed a line no judge should touch, or 2 if you're rooting for Malia to claw her way out of this pit. Like this video if his corruption boils your blood, and subscribe because tomorrow's twist will flip everything you thought you knew. Could Malia's next move turn Holt's lies into his own noose, or has he already tightened the knot too far? Stick around to find out what brews in the shadows of this Birmingham nightmare. Malia Carter sat rigid on her cot in Jefferson County Jail's infirmary. The antiseptic sting sharp in her nose as she flexed her stitched arm, the gash from the yard fight pulsing under fresh gauze she'd swapped for the blood-soaked mess. The $1 million bail clipboard lay crumpled at her feet, Vernon Holt's signature a taunt burned into her memory. Her jumpsuit clung to her sweat-damp skin, the fabric rough against her bruises as she replayed the last day, the shiv slicing. Her flesh, the protests roaring outside, Holt's smear turning her into Birmingham's villain. She'd held her ground, stitched her own wounds, thought Travis Reed's next move would crack this cage wide open. But the silence stretched, the infirmary's flickering bulb casting jagged shadows across the green-tiled walls, and her gut, twisted with a prickle she couldn't shake. Footsteps thudded down the hall, heavier than the guard's lazy shuffle, and Leonard Baxter loomed in the doorway, his 6'4" frame swallowing the light, his buzzed blonde hair glinting like steel. His pale blue eyes locked on her, a predator's glint, and he stepped in alone, slamming the door shut with a clang that echoed in her skull. "Time to talk, Carter," he growled, his voice thick with menace as he cracked his knuckles. The sound snapping through the quiet like gunfire. Malia stood, her legs steady despite the ache in her ribs, her training locking her spine straight as Len closed the gap. "Don't know what you mean," she said, her tone flat, playing the dumb. "Card she'd honed undercover." He snorted, a wet rasp, and lunged, his meaty hand slamming her against the wall, the concrete jarring her stitches loose as blood seeped warm through the gauze. "Bullshit," he spat, his breath hot with tobacco and hate as he pinned her, his forearm crushing her chest. "Who are you, really? Too calm for some street trash caught dirty." His free hand ripped at her jumpsuit, searching pockets she'd already emptied, his fingers grazing her skin with deliberate roughness. "You're Holt's problem now, black bitch," he snarled, the slur dripping like venom as he yanked her, arm twisting it until she gritted her teeth against the pain. She stayed silent, her mind racing to the coded note she'd scribbled for Travis last night, tucked in her sock. "Seize onto me. Push hard." Len's hand brushed her ankle, and her breath caught as he pulled the paper free, unfolding it with a grin that bared yellowed teeth. "What's this, huh?" he said, waving it in her face, the ink smudged but legible. "You're done." Malia's blood turned cold, her cover teetering on a knife's edge, but she stared him down, her dark eyes unyielding even as her pulse hammered. Across Birmingham, Vernon Holt stood in his chambers, the city's skyline a grey smear through rain-streaked windows as he watched embers of protest flicker below. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier's glow, his wire-rimmed, glasses fogged with the bourbon he swirled in a cracked glass. The smear campaign had worked, Channel 9's lies choking the street's roar, but Len's text about the alias glitch gnawed at him like a splinter under a nail. A Fed. Malia Carter wasn't just defiant, she was planted, a snake in his garden. He'd covered his tracks for decades, burning files in his office fireplace, the ashes curling black as he fed them ledgers of kickbacks from prison CEOs and slimy developers. But he couldn't burn everything, not the scraps he kept in a locked drawer, receipts taped calls enough to bribe his way out of any Fed net. He drained his bourbon, the burn steadying his hands as he dialed a number he hadn't touched in years, a mole he'd buried deep in the FBI's Atlanta office. "Carter's one of yours," he said, his voice low, a growl against the static. "Stall her out. Cash is wired." The woman on the line, a clerk with a gambling debt he'd erased, hesitated, her breath hitching. "That's big, Holt." He slammed his fist on the desk, the wood shuddering. "Do it, or I'll dig up your dirt." She muttered agreement, and he hung up, his lips curling into a sneer. Malia thought she'd outsmarted him, but he'd choke her in red tape. Back at the jail, Len tossed the note onto the infirmary floor, his boot grinding it into the tiles as he loomed over Malia, his hand still pinning her to the wall. "Holt's got questions," he said, his fist slamming her gut, air bursting from her lungs as she doubled over, her stitches ripping wider. "Who's this for, huh?" she gasped, her vision swimming, but kept her mouth shut, her training a steel cage around her words. He swung again, his knuckles cracking her jaw, blood trickling warm down her chin as she staggered, her shoulder slamming the cot. "You'll talk, princess," he snarled, kicking her ribs, the snap of bone vibrating through her chest. She curled inward, pain searing white-hot, but her mind clung to Travis, to the warrants, to the protests swelling outside. She'd endured worse, taken beatings in a Chicago sting, and walked away smirking. Len stepped back, wiping his hands on his pants, his grin feral as he left her crumpled on the floor, the note scraps scattered like ash. She coughed, blood flecking her lips, and thought of the streets, the chants, her leak tearing Holt's mask off. He'd hit hard, but she'd hit back harder. Dawn would bring freedom, she told herself, dragging herself onto the cot, her breath shallow but steady. Travis Reed paced the motel room, his boots scuffing the stained carpet, as his phone buzzed with a text from a friendly judge. Bail order signed. "Carter's out by morning." He grinned, his scarred hands unclenching as he fired off a reply. "Push it through." The protests had hit 5,000, a sea of signs clogging Birmingham's streets, their roar filtering through the motel's thin walls. He'd leaked more evidence that morning, a wiretap of Holt promising a developer leniency for cash, and X had erupted. Retweets climbing to 20,000. Malia's earpiece clip, the bribe photo, now this. Holt's empire was cracking, and Travis could taste the win. He pictured her walking out at sunrise, her braids swinging, her sharp eyes glinting with triumph. She'd taken the fall, bled for it, and now the feds would storm in, cuffs ready for Holt's wrists. He sank onto the bed, the springs creaking under his weight, and let relief flood his chest. She'd endured the yard, the smear, and soon she'd be free. 5,000 voices screamed her name outside, and he knew she'd hear them, feel them, know she'd won. But in Holt's chambers, the judge's phone buzzed again, the mole's voice a whisper through the line. Warrants. Stalled. Bail's on hold. Holt's grin returned, cold and vicious, as he set the glass down, the clink echoing in the empty room. Malia's note, Len's text, the alias glitch. She was a fed, and he'd bury her deeper. He buzzed Len, his voice a hiss. She's done. Fake an assault charge. She attacked you in that cell. Add 10 years. Len chuckled, already dialing the jail, and Holt leaned back, his silver hair catching the light as he pictured her face, that flicker of defiance he'd crush. The protests roared louder, 5,000 strong, but he'd paid off enough to flip them, his smear sinking roots. He'd burned files that night, flames licking paper in his fireplace, but the mole's tip was gold. Malia thought she'd swing, but he'd swung harder. Malia heard the cell block buzz with new tension, boots clomping as a guard stormed in, his face twisted with glee. "Carter, you're cooked," he said, slapping a new charge sheet on the cot. "Assault on Baxter. 10 more years, bail's dead." She snatched it, her eyes scanning the lies. "Inmate attacked officer during routine check, unprovoked." Her stomach dropped, her ribs screaming as she stood, blood dripping from her reopened stitches onto the floor. Len's ambush, the note. Now this. Holt had countered, fast and brutal, his suspicions sharpening into a noose. She'd thought Dawn would free her, the protests her shield, but he'd turned her own team against her, a traitor lurking in Travis's ranks. The guard smirked, snatching the sheet back as he left, and Malia sank onto the cot, her mind spinning. 60 years stretched to 70, her leak, her fight, her blood all for nothing. Holt wasn't just winning, he was rewriting her into a ghost, and someone close had sold her out. Malia Carter slumped against the infirmary wall in Jefferson County Jail, her cracked ribs grinding with every shallow breath, her stitched arm oozing blood through the gauze as Len Baxter's beating throbbed in her bones. The 70-year sentence loomed like a tombstone, Holt's fabricated assault charge piling onto the drug frame-up, his $1 million bail a lock she couldn't pick. Her jumpsuit hung torn at the shoulder, sweat and blood smudging the orange fabric as she pressed her, palms to her eyes, willing the pain to sharpen her focus. Travis Reed's warrants were stalled, a traitor in his team choking her lifeline, and the protests outside, now a faint hum through the bars, felt like a cruel tease. She'd leaked Holt's hate, bled for it, thought the streets would force his hand, but he'd turned her into a ghost, his smear campaign painting her as Birmingham's menace. The infirmary door creaked, a guard's shadow flickering, and Malia tensed, expecting Len's hulking frame to loom again. Instead, a skinny inmate slipped in, her eyes darting as she whispered, "Words out, they're coming for you." Malia's pulse spiked, her training snapping her upright despite the ache. Holt's influence ran deep here, a venom seeping through the walls, and she knew a hit was brewing. She stood, her sneakers scuffing the tiles, and braced for the storm. The cell block erupted hours later, a roar splitting the night as alarms blared red, their shriek piercing Malia's skull. Inmates flooded the halls, fists smashing trays against bars, shouts echoing like a war drum as guards vanished, their boots a fading echo. Malia slipped into the chaos, her eyes scanning for the spark. Holt had orchestrated this, paid off the screws to let it burn. A burly woman with a neck tattoo lunged from the crowd, a shiv glinting in her fist, her snarl thick with Holt's lies. "Snitch dies tonight," she bellowed, the blade slashing toward Malia's throat. Malia dove, the steel grazing her ear, a hot sting blooming as she rolled, her ribs screaming. She scrambled to her feet, dodging a second swing, and bolted. For a supply closet, its door ajar amid the madness. Another inmate, a wiry man with a shaved head, blocked her path, his fist slamming her jaw, blood spraying as she stumbled. She kicked his knee, the crack of bone drowned by the riot's howl, and lunged into the closet, slamming the door shut. Her hands fumbled in the dark, piling mops and buckets against the frame as screams pierced the walls, the air thick with sweat and rage. A Molotov cocktail shattered nearby, flames licking the hall, their heat seeping through the cracks as Malia crouched, her breath ragged. Holt wanted her silenced, buried in this chaos, and she'd barely dodged the blade. Across town, Travis Reed kicked open the motel door, his wiry frame taut with fury as his phone buzzed with jail footage hacked from a guard's feed. Flames danced on the screen, inmates scattering, and his scarred hands clenched tight enough to crack knuckles. "She's in there," he muttered, grabbing his vest and gun, his voice a growl as he rallied 3 agents from his team, their faces grim under the motel's buzzing neon. He'd missed Holt's mole, let Malia bleed, but this riot was his line in the sand. They piled into an unmarked SUV, tires screeching on wet pavement as they sped toward Jefferson County, 30 miles north. Travis's radio crackled, a contact at the jail stammering, "It's a setup, Holt's orders." His stomach twisted, guilt clawing his chest as he floored the gas, the engine roaring through Birmingham's empty streets. He'd pulled Malia out of tighter spots, like that Detroit sting where he'd blasted through a gang hideout with seconds to spare. But this was different. Holt's reach a spiderweb he couldn't cut. The jail loomed ahead, smoke curling from its gates, and Travis leapt out, his team fanning behind him as he stormed the yard, gunfire popping in the distance. He spotted the closet, flames licking its edges, and kicked the door in, yanking Malia. From the inferno, just as the roof groaned, embers raining down. She stumbled into his arms, her ear bleeding, her jumpsuit singed, but alive. "You're late," she rasped, her voice a blade through the chaos, and he grinned, hauling her to the SUV as the jail burned behind them. Safe in a new motel 20 miles east, Malia sank onto a creaky bed, her ribs a dull roar as Travis handed her a burner laptop, its screen glowing in the dim room. "Hit him back," he said, his voice tight, and she nodded, her bruised fingers flying over the keys. She hacked Holt's email, a backdoor she'd planted 2 years ago posing as a courthouse IT lackey, and pulled a thread. A payment memo to the jail warden, $10,000 for riot prep. Her lips curled, a flicker of triumph as she uploaded it to X, the file exploding online, retweets hitting 50,000 in an hour. Protests reignited, 10,000 strong, their chants shaking Birmingham's core. "Holt burns us. Free Malia now." She leaned back, the mattress sagging under her weight, her ear still stinging as she pictured Holt's silver hair matted with sweat, his empire cracking under her blow. She'd survived the riot, turned his trap into her weapon, and Travis's. Rescue was her lifeline. The streets roared louder, their fury her shield, and she closed her eyes, believing she'd swung the tide at last. This was it, her win, the moment she'd bled for. But Vernon Holt stood in his chambers, the city's skyline a dark smear beyond rain-streaked glass as he watched the X-post spread, his bourbon trembling in his hand. The riot memo glowed on. His phone, Malia's hacker gut punch, and his silver hair fell loose, his wire-rimmed glasses fogging with rage. 10,000 screamed outside, their signs bobbing like a tide he couldn't stem, but he wouldn't fold. He'd paid the warden. To spark the chaos, let the inmates bury her, but she'd slipped through, a cockroach in his kitchen. He slammed his glass down, amber splashing across his desk, and grabbed a burner phone, dialing a contact at Channel 6. "Spin it," he barked, his voice a hiss. "Carter started the riot. Terrorist, cop-hater, all of it. Air it now." The producer stammered, but Holt cut him off. "Double the cash, do it." He hung up, his grin feral as he buzzed Leonard Baxter, his enforcer's hulking frame filling the doorway moments later. "She's out," Holt said, his eyes glinting. "Find her sister Serena, bring her to me." Len nodded, cracking his knuckles, his buzzed head gleaming as he slipped out, a wolf on the hunt. The motel TV flickered on, a Channel 6 anchor's voice slicing through Malia's haze. Breaking news. Malia Carter, suspected terrorist, incited a deadly jail riot tonight. The screen flashed doctored footage, her face twisted as she dodged the shiv, edited to look like she'd swung first. Judge Vernon Holt calls her a threat to Birmingham's safety, the anchor droned. And Malia's stomach dropped, her triumph souring as her fists clenched. Holt had flipped it, turned her leak into his lie, and the protests faltered, some, chants fading under the broadcast's weight. She stood, her ribs protesting, and Travis cursed, his scarred hands gripping the laptop as he scrolled X, the hashtag #CarterKills, trending alongside her win. Then his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Serena's gone, warehouse on 5th, Holt. Malia's blood ran cold, her sister's name a dagger in her chest. She'd hacked him, survived his riot, thought she'd won, but Holt had struck back, his claws sinking into her family. The motel walls closed in, the air thick with mildew and dread, and she grabbed Travis's arm, her voice a rasp. We move, now. Holt wasn't just fighting. He was hunting, and Serena was his bait. What do you make of Holt's twisted riot spin? Comment 1 if you think his lies have gone too far to swallow, or 2 if Malia's hack proves she's still got the upper hand. Like this video if you're stunned by his family-targeting gut punch, and subscribe because tomorrow's showdown will rip everything apart. Has Holt's desperation pushed him past redemption? Or will Malia turn his sister-snatching trap into his breaking point? Stay locked in to see how this Birmingham battle explodes next. Malia Carter stood frozen in the motel room, her cracked ribs aching as she clutched Travis Reed's phone, the text glowing like a wound. Serena's gone. Warehouse on 5th. Holt. Her sister's name seared through her, a jolt sharper than the riot's shiv or Len Baxter's fists, and her jumpsuit clung damp with sweat, the singed fabric scratching her burns from the jail fire. Vernon Holt had flipped her hack, turned her riot survival into a terrorist label, and now he'd snatched Serena, her 28-year-old sister, a nurse with no part in this war. Malia's dark eyes blazed, her mind racing back to Serena's soft voice, her steady hands stitching cuts from their childhood scrapes in Birmingham's rough south side. She'd kept Serena out, buried her FBI life deep, but Holt had found her, his claws sinking into the one tie she couldn't cut. Travis paced beside her, his wiry frame taut, his scarred hands flexing as he loaded a pistol, his voice a growl. We hit him now. Warehouse on 5th's a steel mill, abandoned since the 80s. Malia nodded, her jaw tight as she grabbed a hoodie from the motel bed, pulling it over her orange rags to mask her target silhouette. He wants me to run to him, she said, her voice low, a blade honed by rage. Let's give him what he asked for. They slipped out into the night, Birmingham streets a tangle of shadows and sodium light, as Travis drove the SUV, its engine a low hum beneath the distant wail of sirens. Protests flickered still, 10,000 strong but scattered by Holt's. Channel 6 lies, their chants a faint pulse against the city's hum. Malia's burner phone buzzed, a grainy video from Holt loading in jerky frames. Serena gagged in a chair, her braids loose, her brown eyes wide with terror as Len's hulking shadow loomed behind her. Holt's voice crackled through, cold and smug. Come alone, Carter, or she's meat. Malia's stomach twisted, her fists clenching until her nails bit her palms, blood welling under the skin. Travis glanced at her, his jaw tight. He's baiting you. We go in smart. She nodded, her mind mapping the mill from a recon gig years back. Rusted beams, broken cranes, a maze of steel and dust, perfect for ambush. They ditched the SUV a mile out, cutting through alleys thick with the stench of garbage and oil. Dodging. Holt's hired thugs patrolling in beat-up trucks, their headlights slicing the dark. Malia's ribs throbbed with every step, her ear still stinging from the riot's graze, but Serena's face drove her forward, a beacon through the pain. The steel mill loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette clawing the sky, its windows shattered teeth in a rotting jaw. Malia and Travis crept through a side gate, the metal groaning under their weight as rust flaked onto her hands. Inside, the air hung heavy with mildew and iron, the floor littered with broken glass that crunched beneath her sneakers. She signaled, Travis to flank left, his pistol glinting as he vanished into the shadows, while she moved right, her hands scavenging a lead pipe from a pile of scrap, its weight cold and solid in her grip. Voices echoed ahead, low and rough, and she peered around a rusted beam, spotting 2 guards by a makeshift cage. Serena sat inside, her wrists bound, her nurse's scrubs torn at the knee, a bruise blooming purple across her cheek. Malia's chest tightened, rage surging as she clocked the guards. One lanky with a buzz cut, the other squat with a neck tattoo, both packing knives and smirks. She waited, her breath shallow, until Travis's shadow flickered across the far wall, his signal to move. She lunged, the pipe cracking buzz-cut skull with a wet thud, his body crumpling as she spun, slamming the squat one's wrist, his blade clattering free. He roared, tackling her, but she drove her knee into his gut, flipping him onto the concrete with a groan. Travis emerged, cuffing them with zip ties as Malia ripped the cage open, yanking Serena free. "I've got you," she whispered, cutting her sister's ropes, her hands shaking as Serena clung to her, bruised but breathing. They bolted for a side exit, Travis hot-wiring a rusted pickup in the mill's lot, its engine coughing to life as Malia shoved Serena into the cab. "Go!" she barked, climbing in as tires squealed, the mill shrinking in the rear view. Serena's voice trembled, her words spilling fast. "They grabbed me from the clinic, said you're a cop killer." Malia squeezed her hand, her ribs a dull roar as relief flooded her veins. She'd infiltrated, fought, freed her sister, outsmarted Holt's trap. The truck rattled through Birmingham's industrial zone, weaving past abandoned lots as Travis floored it, his scarred cheek tense but steady. Malia leaned back, her pipe still clutched tight, believing they'd slipped Holt's grasp. Serena was safe, her win a lifeline through the chaos, and she pictured Holt seething, his plan in ashes. Protest still simmered. 15,000 now, their roar a distant hum she could feel in her bones. She'd turned his bait into her strike, and he'd pay for every mark on Serena's skin. But Holt stood in his chambers, the city a dark sprawl. Beyond his windows, as he watched a hidden camera feed on his laptop, Malia's escape playing in grainy loops. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light as he sipped bourbon, his grin feral despite the protests swelling outside. 15,000 screamed her name, their signs a tide crashing against his throne, but he'd rigged the mill with more than guards. He'd planted a bomb 2 days back, a brick of C4 wired to a remote in his pocket, its red light blinking in his mind like a heartbeat. She'd slipped his net, taken his bait and walked away, but he wouldn't let her breathe free. He pressed the trigger, his thumb steady as the screen flared white, a deafening roar shaking the night 30 miles away. The mill collapsed. Steel, twisting into a fiery grave, dust billowing as he leaned back, savoring the chaos he'd unleashed. "Run all you want, Carter," he muttered, his voice a rasp of glee. "You're ash now." Malia felt the blast before she heard it, the truck, rocking as a shockwave slammed the road, the rearview exploding with orange light. "Down!" she shouted, shoving Serena flat as Travis swerved, tires screeching on asphalt splintered by debris. The mill was a mile back, but the boom rattled her teeth, her ribs flaring as she twisted, spotting the inferno clawing the sky. Serena screamed, her hands clawing the seat, and Malia's stomach dropped, her wind souring as shrapnel rained down, a jagged shard slicing her calf, blood pooling hot on the floorboard. "He's insane," Travis growled, his voice tight as he pulled off the highway, the truck skidding into a ditch. Malia ripped her hoodie sleeve, her hands trembling as she pressed it to Serena's leg, the nurse's scrubs soaked red from a gash torn by flying metal. "Hold still," she said, her voice breaking as she grabbed a lighter from the dash, heating her pipe's edge until it glowed. Serena's cry pierced the night as Malia cauterized the wound, the sizzle of flesh, a sickening counterpoint to the distant sirens. Blood streaked her hands, her sister's pain a dagger in her chest, and she sank back, panting as the bleeding slowed, a charred seal holding life in. They'd escaped, but Holt had countered, his bomb a thunderclap erasing her triumph, turning freedom into a desperate scramble through fire and steel. Did Holt's bomb blast shock you to your core? Comment 1 if you think he's lost all traces of humanity, or two if Malia's rescue proves she's tougher than his twisted games. Like this video if Serena's screams hit you right in the gut. And subscribe because tomorrow's fallout will leave you reeling. Can Malia outrun Holt's fiery wrath with her sister bleeding beside her, or has he just lit the match to burn her world to the ground? Keep your eyes peeled for the next brutal twist in this Birmingham inferno. Malia Carter crouched beside the stolen pickup in a ditch off the Birmingham highway, her cracked ribs screaming as she tied a rag around Serena's cauterized leg, the charred flesh still weeping blood through the makeshift bandage. Her sister's breaths came shallow, her brown eyes glazed with pain as she slumped against the seat, the shrapnel wound from Holt's mill bomb, a brutal mark of his wrath. Malia's jumpsuit hung in tatters, her own calf oozing from a jagged cut, her hands slick with sweat and soot as she scanned the night. The mill's inferno glowed a mile back, a red smear against the sky, its collapse a thunderclap that had shattered her fleeting triumph. She'd rescued Serena, thought she'd outsmarted Vernon Holt, but his C4 had turned freedom into a desperate scramble, the blast's echo still ringing in her ears. Travis Reed knelt beside her, his wiry frame tense, his scarred cheek streaked with dirt as he gripped his pistol, his eyes darting to the highway where sirens wailed closer. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice a rasp as he yanked the truck's door open, helping Malia lift Serena inside. "Safe house in Ensley, 10 miles west. Move." Malia nodded, her jaw tight as she climbed in, the engine coughing. To life as Travis floored it, the ditch spitting gravel behind them. The safe house was a crumbling brick duplex in Ensley, a Birmingham suburb tucked behind overgrown pines, its windows boarded tight against prying eyes. Malia stumbled inside, her sister's weight dragging her shoulder as she eased Serena onto a sagging couch, the springs groaning under them. The air smelled of dust and mildew, the walls peeling like old wounds, but it was off the grid, a haven. From Holt's hunt, Travis bolted the door, his boots scuffing the hardwood as he dropped a duffel on the floor, pulling out a burner phone and a laptop. "He's bleeding now," he said, his voice sharp as he dialed a contact at a national news desk. "Mill bombs on you." Malia nodded, her ribs a dull roar as she rummaged through the bag, finding a stolen medkit, gauze, antiseptic, a needle and thread. She knelt beside Serena, her hands steady despite the ache, and peeled back the rag, the wound a raw mess of torn flesh and clotted blood. "Hold on," she whispered, splashing antiseptic that made Serena hiss, her sister's fingers digging into the couch as Malia stitched, each pull of the thread a lifeline. The TV flickered on, a muted news feed showing the mill's wreckage, and Travis uploaded hacked footage, Holt's bomb trigger caught on a mill camera Malia had planted months ago. The file hit X, exploding online, retweets climbing to 100,000 as hashtags flared, Holt kills, Malia framed. Malia tied off the stitch, her breath slowing as she leaned back, believing Holt's suspension was imminent. The feds would raid now, his office gutted, his empire ash. Travis's phone buzzed, a text from an FBI insider. "Raids in, Holt's chambers hit, suspended pending probe." Malia's lips twitched, a flicker of triumph warming her chest, as she pictured his silver hair matted with sweat, his bourbon glass shattering under the feds' boots. Agents stormed his office 30 miles east, seizing half his files. Bribe ledgers glowing under blacklight ink she'd slipped into his desk years back. Protests swelled to 15,000, their roar shaking Birmingham's streets, signs bobbing, in the dark. Justice for Malia. Holt's a murderer. She'd stitched Serena, turned Holt's bomb into his noose, and this safe house was her shield. She sank beside her sister, the couch creaking, and let relief flood her veins. He'd hit her family, burned her win, but she'd hit back harder, the streets her army now. Serena's hand squeezed hers, weak but alive, and Malia thought the worst was behind them, the tide finally hers. But Holt stood in his chambers, the raid's chaos a dull hum as he watched feds cart off boxes, his silver hair wild, his wire-rimmed glasses askew. He'd burned enough files to stall them, but Malia's footage stung, a public gut punch he couldn't dodge. Suspended, not cuffed, he still had pull. He grabbed a burner, dialing State Senator Paul Grayson, a greasy ally he'd funneled prison. Profits too for decades. "Curfew," he barked, his voice a hiss. "City-wide. Carter's riots are the excuse. Now." Grayson stammered, "That's extreme, Vernon." But Holt snarled, "Do it, or I'll bury you too." The line clicked. Dead. And Holt grinned, cold and vicious, as he pictured Malia's safe house choking under his grip. The curfew hit at midnight, Birmingham PD flooding the streets with armored vans, their loudspeakers blaring, "All citizens indoors, riot threat imminent." Malia jolted awake on the couch, Serena stirring beside her as the TV blared the order, a news anchor droning. Judge Holt cites Malia Carter's chaos as cause. Her stomach dropped, her stitches pulling tight as she stood, her ribs protesting. 15,000 voices faded under the crackdown, the streets emptying as cops patrolled with batons and gas masks. Travis cursed, his scarred hands slamming. The laptop shut as he grabbed his pistol. "He's boxing us in," he said, his voice tight. But Malia's mind raced, her safe house a trap now. She'd thought the raid was her win, Holt's suspension her shield, but he'd turned Birmingham into his fist. Sirens wailed closer, tires screeching outside, and the duplex's door rattled under a battering ram's thud. "FBI, open up!" a voice bellowed, but Malia knew Holt's PD puppets, not Travis's team. She grabbed Serena, her sisters, leg buckling as they stumbled to a back window, Travis covering them with his gun raised. The door splintered, tear gas canisters crashing through, smoke blooming thick and choking as cops stormed in, their visors down, their shouts thick with slurs. "There's the black terrorist!" one roared, his baton swinging as Malia shoved Serena through the glass, her own lungs burning as she followed, tumbling onto wet grass. Travis fired warning shots, the pops echoing as he leapt out, the trio bolting through Ensley's backyards, gas stinging their eyes. Malia's ribs flared, her calf oozing blood as she dragged Serena, her sister's stitches holding but her strength fading. They ducked behind a shed, the curfew's silence broken, by boots pounding closer, flashlights slicing the dark. Travis signaled a stolen car a block away, but sirens swarmed, PD vans boxing them in. "Hands up," a captain barked, his rifle trained as 6 cops closed the circle, their faces twisted with hate. Malia raised her arms, Serena trembling beside her, but the captain lunged, cuffing Serena's wrists, yanking her away as she cried out, "Malia!" Another slammed Malia's ribs with a baton, her breath exploding as she fell, her hands clawing the dirt. "She's clean!" Travis shouted, his gun skittering as they tackled him, but the captain smirked, dragging Serena to a van. "Accessory to terrorism," he spat. The lie a dagger in Malia's chest as her sister vanished into the night, the van's taillights fading red. Malia staggered up, her vision swimming, Travis groaning beside her as cuffs bit her wrists too. She'd saved Serena, turned Holt's bomb into his shame, thought the feds had him, but he'd countered with a curfew, his PD, his hounds. And now Serena was gone again. Holt watched the arrest on a live feed from his chambers, now under house arrest, his bourbon glass steady as he grinned, the city's curfew his masterstroke. Channel 6 flickered on, an anchor's voice cutting through. "Malia Carter, Birmingham's most wanted, caught in a violent raid tonight." The screen flashed doctored footage, Malia's face twisted as she fell, edited to show her swinging at cops, her pipe a weapon in their lies. "A $50,000 bounty stands," the anchor droned, and Holt leaned back, his silver hair catching the light as he savored the spin. He'd lost Files, his bench, but turned Malia into Alabama's enemy, her sister his leverage. Birmingham PD, his loyal dogs, had struck fast, the curfew choking her protests, now down to whispers under his boot. He pictured her cuffed Serena, caged, and laughed, a low rasp echoing in the empty room. She'd thought she'd won, but he'd rewritten her into a monster, and the city would hunt her now. Malia knelt in the dirt, her ribs cracked anew, her breath shallow as Travis coughed beside her, the cop's boots retreating. She'd turned Holt's mill into his shame, thought Serena was safe, but he'd ripped her away, his bounty a noose tightening around her neck. Malia Carter knelt in the damp grass of an Ensley backyard, her cracked ribs grinding as she sucked in air thick with tear gas, her wrists raw from cuffs that had bitten deep, before Travis Reed's lockpick set them free. Serena's cry still echoed in her skull, her sister dragged off by Birmingham PD under Vernon Holt's curfew. The van's taillights a red scar fading into the night. Malia's jumpsuit hung shredded, her calf oozing blood through a torn rag, her hoodie lost in the raid's chaos as she staggered to her feet, Travis coughing beside her, his scarred cheek streaked with soot. The safe house smoldered behind them, a ruin of splintered boards and hissing gas, Holt's $50,000 bounty, a beacon lighting her up across Alabama. Channel 6's doctored footage looped in her mind, her face twisted into a cop killer's snarl, the city turned against her by his lies. She'd saved Serena, turned his mill bomb into his shame, thought the feds had him cornered, but Holt had flipped it all. His curfew choking her protests, his PD snatching her sister on a fake charge. "We're ghosts now," Travis rasped. His wiry frame hunched as he handed her a burner phone, its screen cracked but glowing. "Southside's our shot. Homeless network there's off-grid." Malia nodded, her jaw tight as she tucked the phone into her sock, her ribs a dull roar driving her forward. They slipped through Birmingham's shadows, the curfew's silence broken only by distant sirens as they dodged PD patrols, their flashlights, slicing the dark like blades. Malia's face was plastered on every newsstand, her mugshot a grim totem on flickering TVs in shop windows, the bounty a drumbeat calling every thug and cop to hunt her. She led Travis to Railroad Park, a sprawl of overgrown lots and rusted tracks where the homeless carved out a ghost world she'd tapped Undercover years back. The air stank of burnt plastic and unwashed bodies as they ducked under a tarp city, tents strung between pillars beneath a crumbling overpass. A man with a grey beard and a limp old Sam squinted at her from a folding chair, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of stale coffee. "Your trouble," he rasped, his voice a gravel scrape as he studied her blood-streaked face, her orange rags a dead giveaway. "Running," she said, kneeling low, her voice a whisper. "Need a hole to breathe." Sam's eyes flicked, to Travis then back, and he jerked his head toward a tarp patched with duct tape. "Hide there, no names, no noise." Malia crawled inside, Travis behind her, her body sinking into a pile of damp blankets as the city's hum faded, her pulse steadying in the dark. She was off the map, a shadow among shadows, and Serena's rescue was her next strike. Malia pulled the burner from her sock, her bruised fingers trembling as she hacked Birmingham's traffic cams, a trick from her first FBI gig tracing cartel routes. The screen flickered, grainy feeds loading. Serena's transfer to Jefferson County Jail, her sister's braids swinging as cops shoved her into a van, her leg still bandaged from the mill blast. Malia's chest tightened, rage surging as she mapped the route, her mind spinning a plan. "Night drop," she muttered to Travis, her voice low. "Jail's got a blind spot on the east gate. We hit it, pull her out." Travis nodded, his pistol holstered as he scavenged a rusted crowbar from the tent's junk pile, his scarred hands flexing. "I'm dodging heat too," he said, his voice tight. "FBI's sniffing my team. Holt's mole's got juice." Malia's jaw clenched, the betrayal a splinter under her skin. But she focused on Serena, her sister's bruised face afire driving her. She'd turned Holt's bomb into his shame, thought the safe house was her win, and now she'd claw Serena back, shift the momentum. The tarp city buzzed with whispers, old Sam's cough a rhythm in the night, and Malia believed this was her edge, her chance to swing. But Holt sat under house arrest in his chambers, the city a dark sprawl beyond barred windows, as he sipped bourbon from a chipped mug, his silver hair wild, his wire-rimmed glasses fogged with sweat. The feds had half his files, the mill footage. Stung, but the curfew held. His PD loyal and Malia's bounty kept her running. He grinned, cold and vicious, as he buzzed Leonard Baxter, his enforcer's hulking frame filling the screen via a secure video link. "She's loose," Holt said, his voice a hiss. "Serena's in county, stage an accident, make it stick." Len's buzzed head gleamed, his meaty hands cracking knuckles as he nodded. "Guard's dead, she's the blade, easy." Holt leaned. "Say backa?" The mug clinking on his desk as he pictured Serena caged, Malia hunted, his empire battered but unbowed. 15,000 still protested, their chants a dull roar, but the bounty would choke them, turn neighbors into snitches. He'd lost ground, but Malia's blood was his prize and Serena's fall would break her. The curfew's weight pressed Birmingham flat, and he savored it, a king reclaiming his board. Malia and Travis crept through the South Side's alleys at dusk, the burner's cam feed guiding them as Serena's van rolled into Jefferson County Jail, 30 miles north. They hitched a ride on a junker truck, its driver a silent drunk who didn't glance twice, dropping them a mile from the jail's east gate. Malia's ribs flared with every jolt, her calf a throbbing mess, but she pushed through, Travis's crowbar tucked into her waistband as they scoped the blind spot, a rusted fence corner shadowed by a dead floodlight. She signaled Travis to boost her, her sneakers scraping the metal as she climbed, landing soft on the other side, her breath shallow. The yard buzzed with tension, guards distracted by curfew patrols, and Malia slipped to a basement grate, prying. It opened with the crowbar's edge, the steel groaning as she dropped into the jail's underbelly. Travis followed, his pistol drawn as they navigated damp tunnels, the air thick with mold and echoes. She found Serena in solitary, her sister slumped on a cot, her leg a swollen wreck under fresh bandages, her eyes wide as Malia kicked the door. "And tea," Serena rasped, clinging to her as Malia cut her cuffs with the crowbar's tip, her hands shaking with relief. They retraced the tunnels, Travis covering their rear as alarms wailed, the grate slamming shut behind them as they bolted into the night, believing they'd swung the tide. But a vigilante mob waited in Birmingham streets, spurred by Holt's bounty, their faces twisted with hate as they cornered Malia in an alley near Railroad Park. 10 strong, they surged from the shadows, pipes and bats glinting under sodium lights as a wiry man with a shaved head bellowed, "Cop killers ours!" Malia shoved Serena behind her, Travis raising his pistol, but the mob charged, a pipe cracking her ribs anew, her breath exploding as she fell, her crowbar swinging to shatter a knee, the crunch drowned by their slurs. "Black trash!" another roared, a bat slamming her shoulder, pain searing white-hot as she rolled, kicking shaved head's shin, his howl piercing the night. Travis fired into the air, scattering half, but the rest pummeled her, boots stomping her legs, fists, pounding her back until she clawed free, her ribs a jagged mess, blood streaking her face. Serena screamed, clawing at a thug, but Travis dragged them both into a dumpster's shadow, the mob's shouts fading as they limped away, Malia's vision swimming. She'd freed Serena, thought the jailbreak was her win, but Holt's bounty had turned the city into his army, her blood their prize. Inside the jail, Len Baxter slipped into solitary hours later, his buzzed head gleaming as he planted a shiv. In Serena's empty cot, its blade smeared with a guard's blood from a staged neck wound down the hall. "She did it," he growled to a loyal cop, his meaty hands flexing as the report typed up fast. "Serena Carter, guard murder, life sentence." The cop nodded, filing it as Len slipped out, the curfew's weight sealing the lie. Serena's cell buzzed with new tension. Her absence, a ghost Holt would twist, and Malia, bleeding in the alley, sank against Travis, her sister trembling beside her. She'd broken Serena out, turned Holt's curfew into her chance. But Len's frame-up landed like a sledgehammer, a life sentence looming over her sister's head. Holt wasn't just hunting, he was burying them both, his counterstrike a noose tightening with every breath. Malia Carter limped through Birmingham's South Side alleys, her cracked ribs a jagged fire with every step, her calf oozing blood through a soaked rag as she supported Serena, her sister's swollen leg dragging behind her like a dead weight. Travis Reed flanked them, his wiry frame hunched, his scarred cheek pale as he gripped a stolen crowbar, his pistol lost to the vigilante mob that had beaten Malia senseless hours ago. Her jumpsuit hung in shreds, her shoulder throbbing from J. Bat's blow, her face streaked with blood and grime as the curfew's silence pressed heavy around them. Serena's life sentence for a guard's murder, framed by Len Baxter's planted shiv, loomed like a guillotine, Holt's $50,000 bounty turning every shadow into a threat. Malia's mind churned, replaying the jailbreak. She'd freed Serena from solitary, thought she'd swung the tide, but the mob had pummeled her, and now her sister's freedom teetered on a thread. "County jails locked tight," she rasped, her voice a gravel scrape as she leaned against a brick wall, her dark eyes scanning the night. "We hit it again, night drop." She's not staying caged. Travis nodded, his jaw tight. I'll get gear. Feds are moving on Holt. Trial's public now. Malia's chest tightened, a flicker of hope sparking as she pictured Vernon Holt, sweating in a courtroom, her leaks burying him. She'd turned his bomb into his shame, and this rescue would seal it. They scavenged guard uniforms from a dumpster near Railroad Park, the fabric stiff with sweat and stains, but enough to mask them as they crept toward Jefferson County Jail, 30 miles north. Malia's ribs flared with every breath, her crowbar tucked into her waistband as she pulled the cap low, shadowing her bruised face. Travis drove a stolen maintenance van, its engine rattling as they rolled past curfew patrols, their badges glinting fake under sodium lights. The jail loomed ahead, its razor wire glinting like teeth, and Malia slipped out, her sneakers silent on the asphalt as she scaled the east fence, Travis boosting her over. She landed hard, her calf splitting wider, blood pooling in her shoe as she gritted her teeth, the pain of fuel driving her forward. Travis followed, his crowbar gleaming as they navigated the yard, guards distracted by a distant siren wail. Malia found the solitary block, its steel door a slab of shadow, and pried it open with the crowbar's edge, the groan of metal drowned by the jail's hum. Serena slumped inside, her leg a swollen wreck under torn bandages, her braids matted with sweat as she rasped, "Tea?" Malia kicked the door wide, her hands trembling as she cut Serena's cuffs with the crowbar's tip, her sister's arms clinging tight. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice breaking as she hoisted Serena up, her ribs a white-hot scream under the weight. Alarms shrieked as they retraced their steps, a planted sensor tripping the lockdown, its red lights pulsing like a heartbeat. Malia dragged Serena through the basement tunnels, her sister's leg buckling, her breath shallow as Travis led, his crowbar raised. Bullets rained down from a guard tower, the crack of gunfire echoing as Malia shoved Serena behind a pipe, her own shoulder grazing a slug, blood blooming hot through the uniform. She stumbled, her vision swimming, but pushed forward, her crowbar swinging to shatter a guard's knee, his scream lost in the chaos. They reached the grate, Travis prying. It opened as bullets pinged the steel, and Malia shoved Serena through, her sister's hands clawing the dirt outside. Malia followed, her shoulder a throbbing mess, and Travis slammed the grate shut, the trio bolting into the night, their breaths ragged as the jail's lights faded behind them. They hit a rural barn 10 miles west, its wood rotting under a sagging roof, and Malia collapsed beside Serena, her sister's pulse weak but steady. Travis's burner buzzed, a text from an FBI ally. "Holt's trial's live. Bribe records leaked to Senate. He's done." Malia's lips twitched, a ghost of triumph as she pictured Holt cuffed, her evidence his noose. She'd freed Serena, turned his frame up into her strike, and believed justice was hers at last. Across town, Travis sank onto a hay bale, his scarred hands dialing a contact as he uploaded Holt's bribe records to X, the files glowing with blacklight ink Malia had planted years ago. Retweets hit 200,000, hashtags roaring. Holt guilty. Malia wins. The Senate chamber buzzed on a live feed, senators gaping as ledgers flashed on screen, Holt's voice promising cash for leniency, a damning echo. Protests swelled to 20,000, their chants shaking Birmingham streets, signs bobbing in the dark. "End Holt now. Free the framed." Travis grinned, his jaw unclenching as he watched the tide turn, Malia's blood and grit paying off. She'd taken the mob, the bomb, the curfew, and swung back, her sister safe beside her. He believed the trial was her win, the barn their shield, Holt's empire ash under her boots. But Holt sat in a courtroom 30 miles east, his silver, hair neat despite the cuffs, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting as he faced the jury. He spun a sob story, his voice smooth as oil. "I've protected Birmingham from chaos, from criminals like Carter." His eyes welled with crocodile tears, his racist dog whistles landing soft but sharp, swaying a few jurors with nods. He'd lost Files, his bench, but his allies lingered, their whispers a shadow in the room. The trial paused at midnight, Holt escorted to a holding cell as cameras flashed, his smirk hidden behind a handkerchief dabbed at fake sobs. But his burner buzzed, a loyal guard slipping it through the bars, and he dialed a militia group he'd sprung from a gun rap years back. "She's out," he hissed, his voice a blade. "Break me free. Courthouse now." The leader, a grizzled man with a buzz cut, grunted assent, and Holt leaned back, his grin feral as he pictured Malia bleeding, Serena caged again. 20,000 screamed outside, but he'd slipped their net, his empire battered but unbowed. At dawn, the courthouse erupted, militia trucks ramming the gates, gunfire popping as Holt's cuffs snapped free, his silver hair wild as he bolted through a side door, vanishing into Birmingham's sprawl. He grabbed a burner, dialing Len Baxter, his enforcer's buzzed head a beacon in his mind. "Drones," Holt barked. "Military grade. Hunt Carter. End her." Len chuckled, his meaty hands already moving, and Holt slipped into a safe house. His grin cold as he pictured Malia's barn burning, her blood his trophy. Malia stirred in the barn, her shoulder a throbbing wreck as she checked Serena's leg, the stitches holding but the swelling worse. She'd freed her sister, turned Holt's trial into his doom, thought the protests were her shield. The barn's silence wrapped her, hay scratching her skin as she leaned against a beam, her crowbar clutched tight. Travis's burner buzzed. Again a text from his ally. "Holt's loose, militia hit, drones inbound." Malia's stomach dropped, her triumph souring as she staggered up, her ribs flaring. "Move!" she shouted, dragging Serena to her feet, her sister's cry piercing. The quiet as Travis kicked the door open, the horizon buzzing with black specks. Drones whirred closer, their thermal scanners glinting red, and Malia's blood ran cold, her wind shredded by Holt's escape. She'd broken Serena out, thought justice was hers, but he'd countered with a breakout. His militia, his claws, and now they were prey again. The barn trembled as the first drone swooped low, its hum a death knell in the dawn, and Malia shoved Serena toward the woods, her mind racing. Holt wasn't just fighting, he was hunting, and her blood was his endgame. Did Dine. Holt's courthouse escape leave you reeling? Comment 1 if you think his militia move proves he's pure evil, or 2 if Malia's jailbreak grit still shines brighter than his chaos. Like this video if Serena's rescue hit your heart, and subscribe because tomorrow's drone chase will flip this tale upside down. Will Malia outsmart Holt's flying death machines with her sister slowing her down, or has his breakout just unleashed a nightmare she can't outrun? Brace yourself for the next brutal turn in this Birmingham bloodbath. Malia Carter stumbled through Alabama's backwoods, her cracked ribs a jagged fire searing her chest, as she dragged Serena, her sister's swollen leg trailing blood through the underbrush, the barn's splintered ruin a fading shadow behind. "Them!" Travis Reed flanked her, his wiry frame hunched, his scarred cheeks slick with sweat as he clutched a stolen rifle, its barrel glinting in the dawn's grey light. Her jumpsuit hung in tatters, her shoulder oozing from a bullet graze, her calf a throbbing mess as drones buzzed overhead, their thermal scanners cutting through the pines like red-eyed hounds. Vernon Holt's breakout had flipped her trial win, his militia springing him from cuffs, and now his military-grade drones hunted her, a death sentence whirring in the sky. She'd freed Serena from solitary, thought the protests were her shield, but Holt's escape had turned her into prey, his $50,000 bounty a drumbeat echoing through Birmingham's sprawl. "Keep moving," she rasped, her voice a gravel scrape as she shoved Serena behind a gnarled oak, her dark eyes scanning the canopy where black specks darted, their hum a relentless pulse. Travis nodded, his rifle raised, his breath shallow as he whispered, "They're locking heat, we've got minutes." Malia's mind raced, her training kicking in as she scavenged branches and wire from the forest floor, her bruised hands trembling. But swift. She'd rigged traps before, disarmed cartel bombs in Miami's slums, and now she wove a net, her fingers knotting the wire into a snare beneath a thick pine. "Up!" she barked, boosting Serena into the lower branches. Her sister's cry muffled as Malia tied her in, the leaves a frail shield. Travis crouched, his rifle tracking a drone as it swooped low, its red eye glinting, and Malia yanked the wire, the net snapping tight around its rotors. The machine whirred, crashing into the dirt with a screech of twisted metal, sparks flaring as she dove behind a log, her ribs screaming. A second drone buzzed closer, its scanner locking her heat signature, and she rolled, snagging a rock to hurl at its lens, the crack sending it spinning into a tree, its frame crumpling in a shower of pine needles. Travis fired, the rifle's pop echoing as a third drone dodged, its flashbang dropping with a hiss. Light exploded, blinding Malia, her vision a white haze as she staggered, her ears ringing, her shoulder dripping blood onto the moss. "Serena!" she shouted, groping for her sister, her hands finding the oak as the drones pulled back, their hum fading into the dawn. Travis grabbed her arm, his voice a growl through the haze. "They're regrouping. We've got a window." Malia blinked, her sight clearing as she untied Serena, her sister's leg a swollen wreck, her braids matted with sweat and leaves as she slumped against her. "I'm okay," Serena rasped, her voice weak but alive, and Malia nodded, her chest loosening as she hoisted her sister up, Travis leading them deeper into the woods. The pines thickened, their needles a carpet muffling their steps, and Malia's pulse steadied, her crowbar still clutched tight from the jailbreak, her mind spinning a plan. She'd downed 2 drones, thought the third's retreat was her win, a breath to regroup. They hit a creek, its water cold and shallow, and waded. Through, the chill numbing her calf's ache as she pictured Holt seething. His hunt stalled. Travis slung the rifle over his shoulder, his scarred hands steady as he scouted ahead, the forest a shield against the sky's eyes. She'd turned his breakout into her survival, believed they'd slip his net, her sister's weight a fire, driving her forward. The drones had pulled back, the woods quiet save for the creek's gurgle, and Malia sank against a boulder, her breath ragged but steady, thinking they'd evaded the worst. But Holt stood in a militia compound 30 miles east, a concrete bunker hidden in Alabama's hills, his silver hair wild, his wire-rimmed glasses fogged as he watched a live feed on a cracked tablet, Malia's traps downing his drones in grainy loops. His grey jumpsuit swapped for a stolen jacket. He sipped bourbon from a flask, his grin feral as Leonard Baxter loomed beside him, his buzzed head gleaming, his meaty hands flexing. "She's a cockroach," Holt muttered, his voice a rasp of rage as the third drone's retreat flickered on screen. 20,000 protested in Birmingham, their chants a dull roar through the bunker's walls, but his militia was his fist, loyal dogs he'd sprung from jail with cash and threats. He'd lost his trial, his bench, but Malia's blood was his endgame, and Serena's fall would break her. "Napalm!" he barked, slamming the flask down, the clink echoing in the concrete tomb. "Burn her out." Len chuckled, a low rumble as he radioed the drone pilot, a wiry ex-soldier with a scar across his throat. "Load it up. Full strike." Holt leaned back, his eyes glinting as he pictured the woods ablaze. Malia's screams his symphony. She'd slipped his breakout, his bounty, but fire would finish her, a grave of ash and bone. Malia knelt by the creek, her shoulder a throbbing mess as she checked Serena's leg, the stitches holding but the swelling worse, her sister's pulse, weak under her fingers. Travis scouted the ridge, his rifle raised as he whispered, "Clear for now." She nodded, her crowbar tapping her palm, her mind sharpening through the pain. She'd downed the drones, turned Holt's hunt into her stand, thought the woods were her shield. The creek's chill soaked her sneakers, her jumpsuit clinging damp as she stood, helping Serena hobble forward, the pines a wall against the sky. Then the air shifted, a low hum swelling into a roar as the third drone returned, its belly glinting with a canister, its red eye locked on them. "Run!" Travis shouted, shoving Serena behind a rock as Malia dove, her ribs flaring as the drone dropped its load, a napalm strike igniting the forest with a deafening whoosh. Flames erupted, a molten wave swallowing the pines, their needles crackling. Jazz heat seared Malia's back, her jumpsuit singeing black. She grabbed Serena, dragging her through the blaze, her sister's scream piercing the roar as fire licked her heels, her skin blistering raw under the assault. Travis fired, the rifle's pop useless against the inferno as he bolted after them, his scarred hands clawing the air. Malia's lungs burned, smoke choking her as she spotted the creek, its water a faint shimmer through the haze. "There!" she rasped, shoving Serena forward, her sister's leg buckling as they stumbled, the flames a wall at their backs. She dove, pulling Serena into the shallow stream, the cold slamming her blisters as she submerged, her ribs a white-hot scream under the weight. Travis splashed beside them, his rifle sinking as he ducked, the napalm's roar fading into a hiss above the surface, the creek a fragile shield. Malia held Serena's head up, her sister's breath shallow, her braids singed as water lapped their burns, the forest a blazing ruin around them. Blood streaked Malia's hands, her shoulder a throbbing wreck, her calf oozing into the current. But she'd survived, her sister alive in her arms. The drone buzzed away, its canister spent, and Malia staggered up, dragging Serena to the bank, her jumpsuit melted into her skin, her vision swimming as Travis coughed beside her. She'd downed its kin, thought the retreat was her win, but Holt had countered with fire, his napalm a thunderclap erasing her stand. They limped to a hollow under a fallen oak, its roots a cave shielding them from the sky's eyes, and Malia sank beside Serena, her sister's pulse weak but steady, her leg a charred mess under soaked bandages. Travis knelt, his rifle gone, his scarred hands trembling as he tore his shirt into strips, wrapping Malia's blisters, her breath shallow as she leaned against the dirt. She'd turned Holt's breakout into her flight, thought Serena's rescue was her edge, but the napalm had flipped it, a fiery grave she'd barely crawled from. The woods smoldered, smoke curling thick as her mind raced, Holt's hunt a noose tightening with every strike. She'd downed drones, survived his militia, but this was worse, his malice a flame burning her world to ash. Travis's voice cut through a growl of resolve. He's bleeding too, we hit back. Malia nodded, her crowbar slick with creek water, her dark eyes narrowing through the pain. She'd believed they'd slip his net, but Holt had torched it, and now her blood was his fuel. Malia Carter slumped against the rotting wall of a derelict farmhouse, her cracked ribs a searing cage around her lungs as she cradled Serena, her sister's charred leg oozing through bandages soaked with creek water and blood. Travis Reed crouched nearby, his wiry frame taut, his scarred cheek glistening with sweat as he rigged a makeshift door trap with wire scavenged from the barn's collapse. Her jumpsuit melted into her blistered skin, her shoulder throbbing from a bullet graze, her a pulsing wreck as she tore strips from a mouldy curtain, wrapping her burns with trembling hands. The napalm strike had torched their forest shield, Holt's drones a fiery reaper she'd barely outrun. And now this farmhouse, 10 miles west of Birmingham's chaos, was their last stand. Serena's breaths came shallow, her braids singed. Black, her pulse weak under Malia's fingers as she pressed a stolen antibiotic pill into her sister's mouth, the medkit from Ensley their lifeline. "Stay with me," Malia rasped, her voice a gravel scrape as she leaned back, her dark eyes scanning the cracked windows where dawn bled grey through the pines. She'd downed drones, dragged Serena from flames, thought the creek was her win, but Holt's hunt had flipped it, his napalm a thunderclap burning her world to ash. Travis knelt beside her, his stolen rifle propped against the wall, its barrel scratched from the creek's muck. "He's loose," he said, his voice tight as he pulled a burner phone from his vest, its screen cracked but glowing. Feds hit his compound, nabbed dozens, but he slipped. Malia's jaw clenched, her crowbar slick with sweat as she grabbed the phone, her bruised fingers hacking into Holt's militia comms, a backdoor she'd planted years ago tracing gun runs. The feed crackled, voices barking coordinates, Carter's West farmhouse grid. Her stomach dropped, her ribs flaring as she stood, shoving Serena behind a rusted tractor in the corner, its steel a frail shield. "They're coming," she said, her voice ablade as she uploaded the comms to an FBI drop, the file pinging Travis's ally in Birmingham. "Leak it, now." Travis nodded, his scarred hands flying over the keys as the feed hit X, retweets climbing to 300,000 in minutes, hashtags roaring, "Holt hunts, Malia lives." Feds swarmed the compound 30 miles east, cuffing militia. Grunts as choppers buzzed overhead, their blades a distant hum Malia felt in her bones. She'd turned Holt's drones into his shame, thought this leak was her strike, her sister safe beside her as the farmhouse creaked under the morning's weight. The Feds' raid hit Holt's bunker hard, agents seizing rifles and burner phones, the militia's chatter a damning echo of his orders. Travis's burner buzzed, a text glowing, "Holt indicted, federal warrants live." Malia's lips twitched, a ghost of triumph warming her chest as she pictured Vernon Holt cornered, his silver hair matted with panic, his empire crumbling under her leaks. She'd freed Serena, survived his napalm, and now the feds had his throat. Her evidence his noose. Serena stirred, her voice a rasp. "You did it, T." Malia squeezed her hand, her ribs a dull roar as she leaned against the tractor, believing the worst was behind them. The farmhouse's silence wrapped her, dust motes dancing in the grey light, and she thought justice was hers. Holt's hunt, stalled by her swing. But Holt stood in a stolen sedan speeding through Birmingham's backroads, his silver hair wild, his wire-rimmed glasses fogged as he watched the raid on a militia feed, his grin feral despite the cuffs he'd slipped. He'd lost his compound, his drones, but his allies lingered, loyal dogs he'd fed with cash and fear. He grabbed a burner, dialing a sniper he'd bailed from a murder rap years back, a wiry killer with a scar across his eye. "Her mum," Holt hissed, his voice a blade. "Livestream it. Draw Carter out." The sniper grunted assent, and Holt leaned back, his jacket stained with sweat, picturing Malia's blood as his prize. Malia checked Serena's leg, the swelling worse, her sister's skin hot under her fingers as she scavenged a bottle of stolen whiskey from the farmhouse floor, splashing it over the wound to kill infection. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking as Serena hissed, her grip tightening. Travis rigged another trap, wire stretched across the doorframe, his rifle raised as he scanned the woods, the pines a wall against the sky. Malia's burner buzzed, a live feed loading from an unknown number, and her blood ran cold as the screen flared. Her mother's house in Birmingham's south side, a modest brick home glowing under sodium lights, her mum's silhouette in the kitchen window. A sniper's voice crackled through, low and smug. "Carter, come out or she's next." The scope glinted, a red dot dancing on her mum's chest, and Malia's stomach twisted, her ribs flaring as she staggered up, her crowbar clattering to the floor. "No," she rasped, her mind racing back to her mum's soft hands braiding her hair, her voice singing hymns over Sunday dinners. She'd kept her out, buried her FBI life deep, but Holt had found her, his claws sinking into her roots. Travis grabbed her arm, his voice a growl. "It's a trap. We hit him first." Malia nodded, her jaw tight as she shoved the phone into her pocket, her sister's cry piercing the quiet. "I'm going," she said, her voice steel as she bolted for a rusted truck outside, Travis hauling Serena into the cab. They sped toward Birmingham, the truck's engine rattling as Malia floored. Her ribs a white-hot scream, her shoulder dripping blood onto the seat. Travis's burner buzzed again, the sniper's feed looping live on X, retweets hitting 500,000 as hashtags flared, "Holt targets, save Malia mom." Protests roared louder, 25,000 choking the streets, their signs, a tide. "Holt's a killer, family under fire." Malia's pulse hammered, her mum's house 10 miles out, her mind spinning a plan. Draw the sniper, flank him, end this. She'd turned Holt's compound into his shame, thought Serena's. Rescue was her stand, and now her mum's life was her fight. The truck screeched into Southside, the brick home glowing ahead, and Malia leapt out, her crowbar clutched tight as Travis covered Serena, his rifle raised. She crept through the backyard, her sneakers silent on wet grass, her eyes locked on the sniper's perch, a rooftop across the street, his scope glinting red. Then a crack split the night, a bullet slamming through the kitchen window, her mum's scream piercing the air as she fell, blood blooming on the tile. Malia's world. Tilted, her ribs forgotten as she bolted forward, her crowbar swinging at the air, her voice a raw howl. "Mom!" Travis fired, the rifle's pop echoing as he pinned the sniper, the man ducking as Malia raced inside, her hands slipping in blood as she found her mom crumpled by the sink, a bullet through her shoulder, her pulse weak but alive. "Stay with me," Malia rasped, tearing her jumpsuit into strips, pressing them to the wound as her mom's eyes fluttered, her breath shallow. Travis dragged Serena in, the truck a shield outside as he radioed feds, his voice a growl. "Sniper! Hit! Southside! Move!" Malia cauterized the wound with a heated knife from the stove, her mum's cry a dagger in her chest, the bleeding slowing as she sank back, her hands slick with red. She'd turned Holt's hunt into her strike, Thought the feds had him, but he'd countered with a sniper, his live stream a noose drawing her out. The house trembled as sirens wailed closer, her mom's blood her fuel, and Malia stood, her crowbar dripping, her dark eyes blazing through the pain. She'd saved Serena, survived his napalm, but this was personal. Holt's malice, a blade in her family's flesh. Travis's voice cut through, sharp and steady. "He's bleeding worse. We end this." Malia nodded, her mind locking on Holt's next move. Her mom's life, her fire, his hunt, her war now. Malia Carter knelt on her mother's blood-streaked kitchen floor, her cracked ribs grinding as she pressed a cauterized wound, the charred flesh of her mom's shoulder holding under trembling hands, slick with red. Serena slumped against the wall, her swollen leg oozing through bandages, her braids matted with soot as she clutched a dish towel, her brown eyes wide with shock. Travis Reed stood guard by the shattered window, his wiry frame taut, his scarred cheek pale as he gripped his rifle, its barrel trained on the south side street, where the sniper's rooftop perch now smoldered under Fed gunfire. Malia's jumpsuit hung in tatters, her blistered skin raw from napalm, her shoulder oozing from a graze as she tied off the bandage, her mum's pulse weak but steady beneath her fingers. Vernon Holt's live-streamed sniper shot had flipped her compound leak, his hunt piercing her family. And now her mom lay bleeding, a pawn in his war. "Hang on," Malia rasped, her voice a gravel scrape as she stood, her crowbar clutched tight, her dark eyes blazing through the pain. Travis's radio crackled, feds barking, "Ambulance inbound, sniper down." She nodded, her jaw tight. As she helped Serena lift their mom, the trio stumbling to a Fed van rolling up, its siren a wail cutting the night. The hospital loomed 10 miles north, a brick fortress buzzing with chaos, as medics rushed Malia's mom to surgery, her stretcher rattling down sterile halls. Serena collapsed on a gurney, her leg a swollen wreck as nurses stitched it, antibiotics pumping through an IV. Malia paced the waiting room, her ribs a white-hot scream, her blistered hands shaking as she hacked Holt's livestream feed on a burner, uploading the sniper's threat to X. Retweets hit 1 million, hashtags roaring, "Holt shoots, Malia fights." Travis's leak hit next, the militia comms glowing online, protests swelling to 30,000, their chants shaking Birmingham's streets. "End Holt now. Family blood." Feds swarmed the hospital, their vests glinting as they secured the ward, a radio crackling, "Holt's indicted. Manhunt Lev." Malia's lips twitched, a ghost of triumph warming her chest as she pictured Holt cornered, his silver hair wild, his empire ash under her swing. She'd saved her mom, turned his sniper into his shame, thought Serena was safe beside her. The hospital's hum wrapped her, antiseptic stinging her nose as she sank onto a bench, believing justice was hers at last. Travis slipped her a burner update, his scarred hands steady as he whispered, "He's on the run, feds closing in." Malia nodded, her crowbar tapping her palm, her mind sharpening through the haze. She'd freed Serena, survived napalm, leaked his hunt, and now her mom's blood was his noose. Protests roared louder, 30,000 strong, their signs a tide, crashing against Holt's lies, and she pictured him cuffed, his bourbon glass shattering under Fed boots. But Holt slipped through Birmingham's underbelly, his stolen sedan ditched for a motorcycle, roaring into the hospital's psych ward, a back entrance he'd scoped years ago, bailing out a crooked shrink. His silver hair gleamed under a stolen cap, his wire-rimmed glasses fogged as he stormed the ward, his grey jumpsuit swapped for a janitor's coat, a pistol tucked into his waistband. He'd lost his compound, his drones, but his allies lingered, loyal dogs feeding him intel. He found Serena's room, her gurney empty as nurses stitched her leg elsewhere, and grinned, cold and vicious, as he grabbed a psych patient's chart, scrawling a fake transfer. "Carter's sister," he barked to a guard he'd bribed, his voice a hiss. "Move her to my wing." The guard nodded, wheeling Serena in, her IV dripping as she stirred, her cry muffled by a gag he shoved in her mouth. Malia crept through the hospital's air ducts, her ribs flaring as she crawled, her crowbar clutched tight, her blistered skin scraping steel. She'd spotted Holt's motorcycle on a hacked cam, her training locking her on his trail, and now she dropped into the psych ward, her sneakers silent on the tiles as she scanned the hall. Feds buzzed below, their shouts a dull hum, but Holt was here, his stench a prickle in her spine. She found Serena's room, the gurney gone, a nurse's clipboard showing a transfer, and her stomach dropped, her sister's name a dagger in her chest. She slipped into a janitor's closet, snagging a scalpel from a tray, its blade glinting as she moved, her dark eyes narrowing through the pain. Holt stood in a locked ward, Serena tied to a chair, her leg a swollen wreck as he loomed, his pistol trained on her temple, his grin feral. "Your sister's late," he sneered, his voice dripping venom as he kicked her gurney, her muffled scream piercing the quiet. Malia breached the ward, her scalpel slashing a guard's wrist, his gun clattering as she lunged, her ribs a white-hot scream. Holt spun, his pistol firing, the bullet whizzing past her ear as she tackled him, her scalpel slashing his arm, blood spraying across the tiles. They grappled, Holt's bourbon breath hot as he slammed her against the wall, her blistered, skin tearing, her shoulder oozing as she drove her knee into his gut, his grunt a raw howl. She twisted, her scalpel piercing his thigh, his pistol skittering as he stumbled, his silver hair wild, his glasses shattering on the floor. "You're nothing!" he roared, his fist cracking her jaw, blood spraying as she reeled, her ribs flaring. But Malia swung, her crowbar arcing from her waistband, its edge smashing his knee, the crunch of bone echoing as he fell, his snarl a caged beast's cry. She stood panting, her vision swimming as feds breached the door, their vests glinting, their shouts drowning the ward as they cuffed Holt, his silver hair matted with sweat, his eyes wide with rage. "She's a Fed!" he screamed, thrashing. As they dragged him off, his confession a raw echo in the chaos, Malia cut Serena free, her sister's arms clinging tight, her leg a throbbing mess as she rasped, "You got him!" Malia nodded, her chest heaving, her mom safe below, her leaks his tomb. She'd turned his sniper into her strike, thought justice was hers, and now Holt was cuffed, his hunt her win. But Holt smirked as feds hauled him to a van, his leg bleeding, his grin cold despite the cuffs. He'd planted a bomb in the hospital. Basement 2 days back. A brick of C4 wired to a timer he'd triggered mid-fight, its red light pulsing in his mind like a heartbeat. "So you'll burn," he muttered, his voice a hiss as the van rolled, his silver hair catching the light. The hospital trembled, a low rumble swelling into a roar as the basement erupted, flames clawing up the floors, concrete buckling under the blast. Malia's world tilted, her ribs forgotten as she grabbed Serena, dragging her through the ward, her sister's cry piercing the chaos as debris rained down, a beam crashing inches from her head. She stumbled, her blistered skin searing as fire licked the walls, her crowbar lost in the rubble. Travis bolted in, his rifle raised, his scarred hands yanking a door free as he shouted, "Out!" They ran, the hospital collapsing behind them, floors twisting into a fiery grave as Malia dove, pulling Serena under a gurney, her shoulder a throbbing wreck, her lungs burning with smoke. The blast's roar faded, the ward a smoldering ruin, and Malia sank beside her sister, her mom's surgery wing safe below, her breath shallow as she coughed, blood streaking her hands. She'd turned Holt's hunt into his cuffs, thought justice was hers, but his bomb had flipped it, trapping her in rubble, his malice a thunderclap even in chains. Malia Carter dragged herself from the hospital's smoldering rubble, her cracked ribs a jagged cage stabbing her lungs as she pulled Serena free, her sister's swollen leg trailing blood across the twisted steel and shattered tile. Travis Reed stumbled beside her, his wiry frame battered, his scarred cheek streaked with ash as he coughed, his rifle lost to the blast that had gutted the psych ward. Her jumpsuit hung melted into her blistered skin, her shoulder oozing from a graze, her calf a pulsing wreck as she sank onto the grass outside, the hospital's lower floors still standing, her mum safe in surgery below. Vernon Holt's bomb had flipped her hospital win, his C4 a thunderclap, collapsing her triumph into chaos. But feds swarmed the wreckage, their vests glinting as they dug survivors out, their shouts a dull hum through the smoke. Malia's dark, eyes blazed, her crowbar gone, her hands slick with Serena's blood as she pressed a rag to her sister's leg. the charred stitches holding under her trembling fingers. "We're out," she rasped, her voice a gravel scrape as Serena clung to her, her braids singed black, her brown eyes wide but alive. She'd fought Holt hand to hand, turned his hunt into his cuffs, thought justice was hers, and now the feds had him, his empire ash under her leeks. Travis knelt, his scarred hands steady as he pulled a burner from his vest, its screen cracked but glowing with a live feed. Holt in a fed van, his silver hair matted, his wire-rimmed glasses fogged as he smirked at the camera, his voice smooth despite the cuffs. "I'll appeal and win," he said, his grin cold, his racist allies in high places a shadow in his words. "Birmingham knows I'm right." Malia's stomach twisted, her ribs flaring as she grabbed the phone, her blistered fingers hacking. A final audio from her undercover stash, Holt's voice ordering the hospital bomb taped months ago posing as a janitor. She uploaded it to X, retweets hitting 2 million in minutes, hashtags roaring, "Holt bombs, Malia ends him." Protests swelled to 40,000, their chants shaking the city's streets, signs bobbing in the dark. "Holt's done. Justice lives." Feds hauled Holt to a cell, the audio sealing his fate, a judge's voice booming on the feed. "Life without parole." Malia's lips twitched, a ghost of triumph warming her chest as she pictured his silver hair dull. In a cage, his bourbon dreams dust. She'd saved Serena, survived his sniper, turned his bomb into his tomb, and now her mom stabilized below, her leaks his noose. The hospital buzzed with medics, Serena's gurney rolling to a ward as nurses stitched her leg, her IV dripping steady, her pulse strengthening under Malia's watch. Travis's burner buzzed again, a text from an ally. "Holt's locked, Serena's clear, Mom's out of surgery." Malia sank onto a bench, her ribs a dull roar as she leaned back, the antiseptic air sharp in her nose. She'd freed her sister, bled through napalm, hacked his empire, and now justice was hers. The city's rage her shield. 40,000 voices roared outside, their signs a tide crashing against Holt's lies, and she believed the worst was behind her family safe, at last. Serena stirred, her voice a rasp as she squeezed Malia's hand. "You broke him, T." Malia nodded, her chest loosening, her blistered skin a map of her fight as she stood, her mum's room a floor down, her sister beside her. She'd turned Holt's hunt into his grave, thought the feds had sealed it, and now Birmingham burned with her win, a clean end to his war. But Holt sat in a holding cell 30 miles east, his silver hair neat despite the grey jumpsuit, his smirk wide as a guard slipped him a burner, Victor Slade's voice crackling through. "We're not done," Slade said, his buzzed head a shadow in Holt's mind, his meaty hands ready to strike. Holt's allies lingered, loyal dogs in the Senate and Reapers, their hate an ember waiting to flare. Malia slipped into her mum's room, the beeping monitors a steady hymn as she kissed her forehead, her mum's eyes fluttering open, her voice weak but warm. "My girl." Malia grinned, her ribs easing as she sank into a chair. Serena wheeled. In beside her, the ward a cocoon of relief. She'd survived his drones, his bomb, his sniper, and now her family breathed free, Holt's cuffs her prize. The hospital's hum wrapped her, nurses bustling as feds secured the floor, and she believed justice was clean, her leaks his end. But Serena's hand slipped from hers, her sister's eyes narrowing as she stood, her leg wobbling but steady, a hidden pistol glinting in her grip, snatched from a fallen Reaper in the mill's chaos. "No more," Serena whispered, her voice a broken shard, her braids swinging as she limped out, her IV trailing blood. Malia froze, her stomach dropping as she bolted after her, her ribs flaring, her blistered feet slapping the tiles. Serena reached the jail's visitor wing 30 miles east, a public feed live as Holt met a racist senator, Paul Grayson, his ally grinning through glass, their hands pressed in a silent pact. "No more," Serena repeated, her tears cutting soot as she fired, the shot cracking the night, Grayson's head snapping back, blood blooming on the wall as he crumpled, his eyes wide in shock. Feds froze, guns raised, as Serena dropped the EI pistol, her hands trembling, her leg buckling as she sank, her cry a raw echo. "No more," she screamed, her voice shattering the ward as cops swarmed. cuffing her wrists, dragging her away, her braids swinging wild. Malia burst in, her ribs forgotten as she caught Serena, her sister's arms slipping from hers, the cuffs a cold bite on her skin. "What did you do?" Malia rasped, her breath hitching, her dark eyes wide as the feds pulled Serena to a van, her cry fading down the hall. Holt smirked from his cell, his grin feral as the feed cut, his silver hair glinting, his empire ash but his venom alive. He'd lost his bench, his freedom, but Serena's shot was his prize, her chains a scar on Malia's soul. Malia sank too, her knees, her blistered hands clawing the floor, her mom safe but Serena gone. Her victory bitter ash in her mouth. She'd turned Holt's bomb into his life sentence, thought justice was hers. But Serena's trauma had flipped it, a radicalized act mirroring the system's rot, a wound too raw to heal. Travis limped to her, his scarred cheek grim as he pulled. "Her up," his voice a growl. "She broke, Malia, we'll fight for her." She nodded, her eyes hollow, her body a wreck as she staggered to her feet, blood dripping from her shoulder onto the tile. The hospital spun, medics rushing as feds sealed the scene, and Malia leaned against the wall, her mind reeling. She'd freed Serena from solitary, survived his napalm, turned his sniper into her strike and buried him with leaks. But Serena's shot was the cost, a twist she hadn't seen. 40,000 roared outside, their chants a dull hum. Holt's gone. Malia wins. But her sister's chains echoed her fight, a justice too jagged to claim. Slade watched the news on a smuggled phone in a bar. His buzzed head bowed, his fists clenched as Holt's empire burned, the Reapers lingering, their hate a spark ready to flare. Malia stood in the wreckage, her mom's room a lifeline, her sister's act a scar, and whispered, "It's over," knowing it never truly would be. The city's flames lit the sky, riots flaring as feds hauled Serena off, her radicalized scream a mirror to Holt's cruelty, and Malia slumped against Travis, her resolve unbowed but her spirit cracked, her victory a hollow shell carved by loss. This gripping tale of Malia Carter's battle against Vernon Holt unveils raw truths about resilience, justice, and the cost of fighting systemic racism. Malia's journey teaches us that courage isn't just enduring pain. It's striking back when the system stacks every odd against you. As an undercover FBI agent, she turned frame-ups, riots, and bombs into weapons, showing ingenuity can topple even the most entrenched tyrants. Her relentless leaks and daring rescues prove that truth, wielded with grit, can shatter corrupt empires, no matter how deep their roots. Yet the story's brutal honesty cuts deeper. Justice isn't clean. Serena's radicalized shot at the senator, born from trauma, reveals how oppression scars not just its targets, but those they love, blurring right and wrong in a haze of pain. Holt's downfall underscores that power built on hate is fragile, crumbling under exposure, but the price Malia pays, her sister's chains, highlights that victory can taste like ash when personal loss bleeds through. This narrative demands we question who bears justice's burden and why, pushing us to see beyond systemic racism's surface to its devastating toll. It's a call to stand firm, expose corruption, and brace for the fallout, because real change leaves wounds. Malia's unbroken spirit inspires, but Serena's haunting act reminds us, fighting darkness can spark light or ignite chaos, and the line between is razor-thin. What's your take on Serena's final shot? Justice or tragedy? Comment below. With your thoughts, like if this hit you hard, subscribe for more raw tales and share if you believe truth should burn bright, even when it stings. Thanks for riding this wild journey with us. Here's to strength forged in fire.